The new city of Carthage, still half-finished on the North African coast, was aglow with celebration under a moonlit night. Sweet music and sounds of laughter emanated from the royal palace of Carthage's founder and queen, the famous Dido. This was a night for rejoicing, as two peoples had formed a new bond of hospitality and friendship, the Carthaginians led by Dido, and the refugees from Troy, led by the Trojan hero Aeneas, who had landed at her borders in dire need. After a warm welcome and promises of aid, Dido had invited the Trojans to share in her new community, herself once a victim of a war that had driven her out from her Phoenician homeland. And as the feast went on into the night, the queen and the Trojan prince came to know one another, and all the experiences and the dreams they shared. Something was already stirring in the hearts of these two heroes, one the founder of Carthage, the other the destined founder of his own city in Italy, which would one day, according to fate, give birth to the mighty Roman Empire. But even as they drew closer from their own conversation, the gods of Olympus had plans of their own, which in the end would set this young romance on another course, a darker course, that would haunt the descendants of Aeneas and Dido both for ages to come. As the banquet reached its height, the queen called for a bejeweled golden cup, the one her father and royal ancestors in Tyre had drunk from in their days of power. And when she filled it with rich wine, she raised a toast. "Great Jupiter, god of feasts and mightiest of all the immortals at the table of the gods, grant joy this day to the people of Troy and the people of Tyre, and may our friendship endure for all the future generations." She touched the foaming goblet to her lips and handed it to the nobles who shared her table, and each drank in order, sealing their pledge. Then the long-haired singer Iopas, famed for his wondrous music from the lyre, enchanted the guests. And that night, Queen Dido asked the long-suffering hero Aeneas countless questions about Troy, its wonders, and its tragic fall, and his long voyage before he had finally reached the safety of her shores. And many days after this banquet had ended, she sought Aeneas's company, never tired of hearing the tales he would tell her again and again. Time the prince was only too happy to share with her, as their hours together rolled by. Dido was moved by his story. She hung upon every word that came from his lips, and she could hardly sleep for thinking of him. But memories of her lost love, Sychaeus, the husband cruelly murdered in Tyre, troubled her, and sowed doubts in her heart about her growing feelings for Aeneas. At last, Dido spoke to her sister Anna to seek her advice. Would Sychaeus' spirit be dishonored if she pursued a new romance after she had sworn her undying love to her husband? Anna's counsel was a mixture of a sister's care and the pragmatic advice of a princess of Carthage. "Sorrow for the dead does nothing for the living," she said gently. "You should love, dear sister, while life remains. The Sychaeus who loved you wouldn't begrudge you that. And you are the queen of this land. Think also of the dangers that surround your throne, and how an alliance with Troy would make Carthage strong." Dido heard her sister's comforting advice, which calmed her troubled heart, and she thought more and more of Aeneas day by day. One afternoon, a royal hunt was prepared, in which Dido and Aeneas both took part. The queen was clad beautifully, in a brilliant mantle from the city of Sidon, embroidered with bright colors, and a quiver of gold. Aeneas came to meet her, handsome as Apollo himself. And the hunting party went forth into the hinterlands of Africa on their fine steeds. But during the hunt, a terrible storm arose, sending dark clouds over the sky. The guests were separated from their escorts, and Dido and Aeneas ran for shelter, finding themselves together, alone. They huddled in a cave out of the driving rain, and there, embracing in the calm dark of the cavern, with the storm swirling outside, the queen and the Trojan prince devoted themselves to each other. Lights flashed like wedding torches across the heavens as Juno and Venus looked on, and a loving union was made between the hero and the queen. But this private rendezvous and the romance that followed couldn't stay secret for long, and rumor flew on swift wings around Carthage and the lands of North Africa. While Aeneas and Dido enjoyed their life together, the other kings of North Africa, men who had once sought Dido's hand themselves and been rejected by the queen, grew angry at her new marriage with the foreigner from Troy. The angry prayers of these suitors reached the ears of Jupiter, the king of the gods himself, who looked down upon Carthage with deep concern. This, after all, was not his plan, a grand design that demanded Aeneas to complete his journey to Italy and build a community there that would birth a new Roman Empire to span the whole globe. And so the father of gods and men dispatched the herald Mercury down to Carthage to bear his commands to Aeneas. The messenger fastened his winged sandals and golden cap and flew through the open air down to the African coast. The gods spied the Trojan prince upon the city walls, directing their construction as the great city continued to rise. Growing accustomed to the ways and garb of Carthage, Aeneas wore a cloak of Tyrian purple trimmed with gold, finely woven for him as a gift from Dido. Just then, Mercury suddenly appeared before a thunderstruck Aeneas, who listened closely to the god's message with a quaking heart. "So decrees the god of Olympus, Prince of Troy. This future, this life of slow comfort in Carthage, is not what fate and the gods have held in store for you. You are the one destined to rule in Italy, whose descendants will bring order and peace to the world through their might. While you're staying here, enjoying the pleasures of these foreign shores, you're defrauding yourself of a kingdom and robbing your son as well. Seek the glory you've been promised, bring honor to your people, and fulfill the grand designs of a world empire. This is what Jupiter demands of you. Make no delay and leave these shores." After this warning, Mercury vanished, leaving Aeneas alone on the wall, terrified at this command and what the king of the gods was asking of him. His heart broke for the implications of this order, but a choice against Jupiter's will was unthinkable. In Italy lay his people's future, and the enduring glory of Troy in a powerful new kingdom. The devoted love of Dido receded in his heart. In spite of all they shared, his purpose was clear. But he feared her anger, and so this dutiful Aeneas instructed his men to prepare their ships in secret to make for a quiet escape from Carthage. But this secrecy did not go unnoticed by the queen, and her heart was rent with sorrow at this betrayal. It had been long since she and Aeneas had shared that first fateful banquet together, since the time in the cave when they pledged their love amid the raging storm. But now, suddenly, the man she loved, with whom she had shared her power and her dreams, was casting her aside without so much as a word. Grief and anger invaded her with a deep wound in her heart and a blazing, furious fire in her mind. she confronted the Trojan prince and lashed out. "Did you think you could hide your plans to leave this land and leave me without so much as a word? Does our love mean nothing to you, or the promises we made to one another? You leave me humiliated, and at the mercy of the enemies at my borders I've angered for the sake of you. Were you the man I abandoned my dear Sychaeus' memory for? And now you wish to leave so desperately that you'll set sail in the middle of winter. You're cruel, and have hardly a care for the woman who loves you." Fearing the warnings of Jupiter, Aeneas averted his eyes and resolved to give no ground. His words were short and calculated, withholding any emotion. "My queen, I cannot deny all the good you have done for me, and I shall never forget you for as long as I live. But I must seek Italy, where my future lay. You have found your own home here in Carthage. How can you refuse the Trojans to sail on to their homeland? Rest assured, if I was in control of my own destiny and could lead my life by my own will, Troy would still be standing, and I would be living happily there. But now dark messages from the gods are warning me to leave and sail on. Italy is my country, and Italy is where my true love is." His words only tore Dido's heart even further, and her eyes blazed. "Then go," she cried. "Go, seek your Italy across the seas. But if there is any vengeance in heaven, you will pay for abandoning me to my death after all I've given you." The coming days were dark and filled with foreboding. While Aeneas continued making preparations to leave, the queen was unseen outside her palace. Within her chambers, she descended deeper into madness, her mind poisoned by hatred, regret, fury, and the pain of a deep love betrayed. She devised a plan to bring down her wrath upon Aeneas and his people, a dreadful plan that would buy revenge at the cost of her own life. The mad Dido sought the help of a priestess to carry forth dark rites, as well as her sister Anna, whom she deceived into aiding her secret plot. She asked Anna to build a funeral pyre in a courtyard of her palace, a place where she would release herself of Aeneas' memory by committing all his gifts and mementos to the roaring flames. She ordered to be sent to the pyre the couch that Aeneas had laid upon, the clothes that he wore, and the Trojan sword that he gifted her, so they would all perish together. An image of Aeneas was also prepared for the heap, an effigy to symbolically burn the man himself. And the priestess, with her hair unbound, sprinkled water and scattered herbs she had cut under the full moon. Darkness fell upon Carthage, and Dido looked on with loose garments, bare feet, and disheveled hair, her face wet with angry tears as the grand pyre was set alight. As the flames grew, she threw meal upon the fire and called upon the gods for vengeance with grim prayers. As this happened in the palace, while Aeneas lay asleep in his ship at the African shore, in a dream Mercury appeared again and warned him of Dido's growing wrath, telling him to escape now while he still could. When the Trojan prince awoke with a start, he called his companions, and they set sail together from that fateful shore, trusting in the gods for the journey ahead. At the morning's first light, the sad-fated Dido ascended a watchtower in her palace and caught sight of the Trojan ships cutting the waves away in flight from her land, bearing her lost love away for good. tears again welled up, coupled with a steely rage, and she tore her hair in anguish. She cried out to the open sky with hands raised in a solemn curse. "Shall this stranger make fools of us all? I call upon you now, divine sun, you who see the whole world, and Juno, who protects the sacred bonds of marriage, and you, Hecate, queen of the darkness and worker of magic, and you, the dreaded Furies, who take vengeance on the wicked. All of you, hear me. If fate demands that he reach his beloved Italy, curse him to suffer at the hands of his enemies, to be driven from his city, and beg for help, and watch his people cut down in bloody wars. And when the wars have ended, I curse him with a short life, to die before his time, and lie unburied in the fields. And you, people of Tyre and Carthage, my people, I command you to hate his children and his nation forever and ever. Let there be no love or peace between you and the people born of Aeneas. And may a mighty avenger, a warrior to cross great mountains and rain down death upon the Italians, may he rise from my grave to torment them with fire and sword. So shall there be war forever between Carthage and Italy, between my children and his." And so the queen cursed the Trojan people, condemning their Roman descendants to fight war upon war against her mighty kingdom of Carthage. With no hope and no life left in her, the sad queen was ready to see through the last act of her vengeance. The broken Dido returned to the sacrificial pyre and was crowned with a garland, as she instructed Aeneas's effigy to be prepared for burning, while her priestesses and noblewomen looked on. And then, in an instant, with utter horror, they watched Dido rush forward and climb the flaming funeral pyre to rest on Aeneas's couch. She brandished the Trojan sword he had gifted her and held it aloft, crying out for all to hear, "Now do I give up my life. I have finished my course. I have built a mighty city. I have avenged my slain husband. Only too happy would I have been had those evil ships of Troy never come to my land." Then she bent down and kissed the bed through flowing tears. And in the blink of an eye, as her maidens reeled back in horror, she whirled the sword around and plunged it through her body. Red blood spilled over her hands as they clenched the golden hilt. And at this sight, a great cry went up through the whole palace, loud and bitter. Her sister Anna heard this wailing and rushed to the courtyard, knowing in her bones that Dido had come to harm. Seeing her sister's crumpled body on the flaming couch, she clambered up the pyre after her and caught Dido limply in her arms. The queen struggled vainly to lift her eyes and her body as Anna tried to staunch her flowing blood, but with a groan, she collapsed back into her sister's arms. Then the great goddess Juno, looking down from heaven, saw that Dido's pain was long and pitied her suffering. She sent down the rainbow-bearing Iris, her messenger, to set loose Dido's noble soul that struggled to be free. Iris arrived in a flash, hovering over Dido's pale form, and shed a lock of hair from her head. And with that, Queen Dido's body fell silent, and her soul journeyed down to the world below. They say that, even after the fires of Dido's pyre had gone out, Carthage's queen and the Trojan prince had one last meeting, when Aeneas was allowed to pass through the underworld in search of guidance for the road ahead. and as he walked through the home of the dead, inhabited by lifeless shades, he arrived at a place called the Fields of Mourning, where he laid eyes again on the beautiful Dido. The wound from Aeneas's own sword was still fresh in her ghostly form, as she dwelt there in peace alongside her true love, her husband Sychaeus, reunited with him in death. Overcome with guilt, Aeneas went to her and poured out his heart with apologies that were only too late. But Dido paid him no heed. Her anger long since cooled into a cold indifference, and turned away without a word to rejoin her spouse in the gloom. Such was the tale of Dido and Aeneas, a tale of love and anger, of betrayal and madness, of mortals helpless against the grand designs of the gods. Aeneas would go on to settle his people in Italy, and his descendants would one day found the mighty city of Rome. But Dido's curse would echo through the centuries. 3 bloody wars would be fought between the children of Dido and Aeneas, between Carthage and Rome. And with that 3rd war, Dido's famed city would be burned to the ground as Roman legions looked on, sending flames into the night sky. It was a funeral pyre as grand as Carthage itself, a fire as all-consuming as the ancient love of the hero and the queen. Hey there, listeners, and welcome to the fiery conclusion of the tragic tale of Dido and Aeneas. As good as Dido and Aeneas were for each other, destiny took a different course, and it seems like the gods had different plans. So, there's lots more to talk about here that we didn't get into in part 1 of this commentary, so let's jump on in now that we have the whole story. The first thing to note is how this myth, as related by Vergil in the Aeneid, connects to Roman history. Ultimately, what the story ends up being is an ideological myth. Now, we've talked about ideological myths in some other stories and commentaries on the channel, and these are origin stories that relate to the creation or the cause of something, why and how certain things come to be. Typically, ideological myths deal with natural phenomena or animals or plants or trees. So, where spiders come from, for example, with the myth of Arachne. But in this case, Vergil's ideological myth-making here involves Roman history, specifically that hugely important series of events in Rome's history called the Punic Wars. Dido's curse upon Aeneas condemns their descendants, the Carthaginians and the Romans, to always make war against each other. And of course, that's what's going to happen. The Punic Wars were those 3 major conflicts between Rome and Carthage, the 2 big powers in the Western Mediterranean world. The most famous of these wars is probably the second one. This is in the late 200s BC, where the commander Hannibal really gave the Romans a run for their money. He marched his troops over the Alps, he had the elephants as part of his army, and he beat the Romans in a series of enormous, crushing victories over Rome. But Rome ended up bouncing back and did finally beat the Carthaginians in that second war against Carthage. And then, about half a century later, in the Third Punic War of 146 BC, Carthage was completely destroyed by Rome. The Punic Wars really paved the way for Rome to grow, from a regional power in Italy to a superpower that commanded the Western Mediterranean. So Vergil's romance of Aeneas and Dido locates the origin of those extremely important wars in this tale of doomed love between the Trojan hero and the Queen of Carthage. He roots the cause of those wars back in mythology. Let's also chat a bit more about the way Vergil tells the story of Dido, because there's a lot of complexity and artistry going on here. There's a reason why the Aeneid is considered one of the masterpieces of all time. One really interesting feature that I love bringing out when I teach the Aeneid in my classes is the poetic metaphors that Vergil uses to describe the course of Dido's love as it becomes a kind of consuming madness. The poetry does this really subtly. So some of the most common imagery that Vergil uses to describe Dido's love is fire, that Dido is on fire, metaphorically. Her love is a fiery, flaming kind of passion. Another device describing Dido's experience of love is that it's like a wound. She's at one point compared in a simile to a wounded deer, as if she's in pain, struck by this deep, all-consuming love. And one more common metaphor for her love is as a kind of madness. Furor is the Latin word that Vergil uses, a word that means rage or fury. And in the bigger scope of Vergil's Aeneid, furor is really important, and it's a bad concept. It's the opposite of dutiful, good, moral, self-controlled behavior. Now, what's especially fascinating about these three images that Vergil uses to describe Dido's love, fire, a wound, and madness, is how the use of these metaphors changes over the course of the story to become absolutely real and concrete by the end of the story. In the earlier parts of the romance, these are just images. They're just used abstractly to describe her feelings. But then, of course, by the time you get to the end of the tale, the imagery becomes literal. Dido's metaphorical wound becomes the real wound that she inflicts on herself with Aeneas's sword. The madness becomes real as she loses her mind and is bent on death and revenge. And the flaming passion becomes real and the actual fire that she builds and throws herself on to die. It's a really cool little detail, this use of imagery, and says a lot about Vergil's skill as a poet and a storyteller. The Aeneid really is one of those texts that rewards careful reading and rereading. Every word is there for a reason, and there's a lot of great artistry in there to discover. Staying with Dido, let's also talk a bit more about the mythological models for Dido's character as well. Another interesting thing about Vergil's Aeneid is that it's not just a traditional epic poem with the conventions of, say, the Iliad and Odyssey, but it also includes elements from different literary genres. So you have some conventions rooted in lyric poetry and elegy, this genre of shorter, sort of more heartfelt poems, often relating to love. You also have a lot of Greek tragedy in the Aeneid as well, these stories of people pushed to extreme circumstances with high emotions, and usually some sort of sad catastrophe that happens at the end. So you get from the epic side of the mixture the heroes, the gods, the battles, the major themes about founding cities. And on the lyric, elegiac, tragic side, those influences on the Aeneid come through in the more personal, more intimate, more emotional sides of the story, where the characters have this interior complexity to them. Now, Book 4 of the Aeneid is probably the best place to see this latter side of the poem in action. And Dido's character is inspired by a lot of famous earlier characters from Greek tragedy and Greek epic, drawn from mythology. In the commentary for Part 1, we talked about intertextuality, and there's a lot of intertextuality between Dido and other well-known characters from Greek myth and literature. So, starting with Greek mythology, you have the character Medea, star of another Winedark Sea story, who is best known from the play written by Euripides. And Medea is a witch who falls in love with a hero, this time the hero Jason, and is then betrayed by this hero later on when he decides to leave her. And just like Dido does, Medea ends up completely losing it to the point of actually killing her own children with Jason as a means of getting revenge on him. Some other models for Dido come from the epic side. Two of the heroines from Homer's Odyssey, Calypso and Nausicaa. These are similar to Dido's role in the Aeneid in that both of them appear as helpers of Odysseus when he washes up on their respective shores. Calypso ends up detaining Odysseus for a long time on her island, acting as a kind of surrogate wife for him, sort of in some ways like what happens with Aeneas and Dido. And with the princess Nausicaa, while they don't fall in love, her and Odysseus, she does show him the same really good hospitality that Dido does for the Trojans. And for the Odyssey, we could also add Circe in Odyssey Book 10 as a model for Dido, too. We're almost sort of primed, as readers of Aeneid Book 1 who might have read the Odyssey before, to imagine Dido as a Circe-like figure. But one of the most intriguing models for Dido is actually not from the realm of literature and myth, but from history. Remember, Vergil is writing his Aeneid in the early years of the reign of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and the event that solidified Augustus's rule in Rome was the big war against Antony and Cleopatra that culminated in the year 30 BC. The Roman commander Antony had fallen in love with Cleopatra, the queen of Egypt, and the narrative from Antony's enemies was that he had forgotten his duties as a Roman in favor of his love affair with the Egyptian queen. Now, Egypt is not quite the same as Carthage, but they do share a coastline in North Africa. They're pretty close. And ever since the publication of Vergil's poem, Aeneas's romance with Dido has been seen as a sort of reflection of Antony's marriage to Cleopatra. But of course, Aeneas, in this story, succeeds in fulfilling his duty and leaving the foreign queen. He succeeds where Antony failed. Antony stayed with Cleopatra, and so betrayed Rome. So in that way, Cleopatra and Dido are both these foreign queens who represent a dangerous temptation for Roman leaders. Aeneas, at least, a proto-Roman. Okay, well, I think that's enough heavy emotion for one day, with part 1 and part 2 of this story. Dido is no more, and Rome will be founded. Thank you very much for listening, and if any questions or comments or things to add come to mind, please do let me know. And thank you for your support in keeping the channel going. Enjoy the rest of your day, take care, and remember, breakups are tough, but there are healthier ways to work through that than uttering curses and jumping onto your own funeral pyre. Don't do that.